Racism in all its forms hurts. We often see ourselves as victims of racism without taking into consideration our personal biases, which themselves could be racist to others. In other instances, we form our opinions and impressions of other cultures based on ignorance and societal stereotypes. In its efforts to awaken collective consciousness and mobilize action towards combating racism, the Truly Alive Youth and Family Foundation interviewed some members of the community in Saskatoon. They shared their personal stories on racism, their perspectives on what possibly motivates racism, and gave their insights into what can be done at the individual and community level to combat racism in all its forms.
We see it from our newcomer friends too, and that they're taking that attitude of judging us, by what they see on TV, what they read. I'll take an example. It happened 2 weeks ago. I went to a grocery store. I was behind a Caucasian woman. There was a newcomer cashier, and they were talking nice and that, and gently gave her, bags. Do you need bags, ma'am? Yes, and that. So she was giving that to her, and she went about her ways, and then I came up, and then she looked at me, and do you need any bags? I said, yes, please. Grabbed 2 bags and just threw them at me. So what does that tell you? That change of voice, that action, the action behind that. What does that tell you? I mean, here, we're being disrespected by mainstream, but now our newcomer friends are doing it to us. I said, please don't do that. I said, don't disrespect me like that. I gave her the bags back. I said, no, we don't need the bags. I said, thank you. I walked away.
When we first came to Canada, like day one, they warned us. We were warned by some people that, oh, be careful of First Nations. They're very violent people. They'll steal from you. Be careful when you walk on 20th Street. So I was really scared of First Nations. When I see them on the streets, I'll cross the other way, because I was just thinking, oh, these people, they're going to harm me, or they're going to do something. There's something against me.
I don't blame the newcomers. I'm sure they want to know who we are and what our true culture is, like the rich culture that we have. But they're just given the negative.
Racism, discrimination, all that stuff is a learned behavior. There wasn't very many Indians in Regina. In the school I went to, there was maybe 5 or 6 of us. And my friends, I had best friends, and they're all white, and one of my friends said, you can't come to my place. And I said, well, why? Well, because you're an Indian. And I said, oh. And I didn't even know what an Indian was. But she never explained. I didn't know. So I just didn't go to her house because it was her parents. So it was her parents, right? And that's where it starts. It starts at the parents.
I can maybe tell a story about my own experiences. So when I was in my 20s, I was in university, and I wrote a paper about some settlement community in Saskatchewan. And my professor challenged me on it and said, there was a First Nation not 2 miles away from these people, and you didn't say anything about them. Why did you do that? And so at that time in my 20s, that was incredibly shocking to me, because I had never heard any overt racism in my family growing up. I thought, how can it be? I had done this thing that had replicated part of this system by just erasing some of the history. And so I thought, how can this be? And so it was very shocking for me. And that started me on a road of confronting the biases that have been internalized. So I think it is a learned behavior, and so it's begun the process of unlearning.
Being from Lebanon, being of the Muslim faith, it's easier to identify a Muslim female than a Muslim male. Considering my mom, who wears a hijab, the racism she faces tends to be a lot more than just subtle. It's very direct. She's had experiences in different storefronts. She walks into a store and she faces a different treatment. A lot more supervision comes around her, so it's very subtle in the sense that when they come to approach her asking for if she needs help with anything, it was not a sense to help her, it was a sense to keep an eye on her.
I have a friend who works with someone who works in HR, and they say that when people apply for jobs, they look at their names. If your name is not so English or French, then there's a possibility that you might not get a job, even if they haven't seen you yet.
The questions that often gets asked is, why do we have racism and what contributes to racism? And I think that it basically two major factors, two broad sets of factors. One factor is fear, and there's fear of the unknown in some cases, and the other is hatred. And hatred and fear manifest themselves both overtly and covertly.
We think about systemic racism as laws or policies that contribute as a whole. Fortunately, nowadays, there is all kinds of knowledge about how racism works as a system. So, for example, we can see that the residential schools were part of a system. They were policies put in place designed to make life difficult for one group of people. And past system is another example. So we can see now how these things are systemic. And for me, the systemic qualities of racism all stem from a single narrative of one culture being superior to another. And that narrative enables all of these systemic things.
It was the first time I experienced racism. I didn't know what to do, so I took a course on racism. And what I learned is that racism is when a human being looks down on another human being, looks down as in they feel more superior than the other person in terms of intelligence or in terms of behavior. There's so many other things that someone can feel superior than another person, but in terms of racism, it's just because of the color of the skin.
I can think of two reasons as to why people can be racist or have motivation to be racist. One is being proud or arrogant in the sense that your culture or your way of life might be better than the next person or the other person's culture and way of life. Everyone's proud of their parents, proud of their ancestors, proud of the history they come from and the roots they come from. Second reason someone having the motivation to be racist is lack of education. It's not just in the sense that textbook education, learning about a distant culture or learning about their music or their way of life, but overall the fact that they lack the experience of that culture.
And I think there are two fundamental things that need to be done in order to reduce racism even more. Number one, I think that we need to give people a better understanding or sense of why they or others might have racist perspectives. And I think that we need to do that in schools, and I think we need to do that in the public sphere. The other thing that I think we need to do in addition to education is that we need to develop what is known as a public philosophy. We have to continue to build a public philosophy that values diversity, that values tolerance, that values appreciation for the positive qualities and the positive contributions of all people.
The best way to unlearn things has been to be with other people, and not necessarily in an anti-racism context, but even just to work on a project together, or to just be around the table for some reason, or just be making friends and saying how's the weather and all of those kinds of things. Well, I can say for the Saskatchewan History and Folklore Society, we have a youth storytelling program, and what has worked incredibly well is we had funding for artist mentors, and almost all of them have been Indigenous. So we have new Canadian youth, and we have Indigenous artist mentors, and nobody specifically is talking about racism directly, but we're just being together, learning about art. And we also incorporate a lot of Indigenous teachings into the workshop. So we have an elder, and one of the youth gets to present tobacco at the beginning of each session, and it starts with a prayer. And our elders had a chance to give a little bit of education on some of the protocols from her cultural background.
And us as a business owner in the city of Saskatoon who provide cultural food and experience outside of Canada, part of our reasoning of opening up this restaurant is not just as a way to make a living, but just to showcase our food and culture. No one complains when there's good food on the table. Everyone is happy to eat. And we find that with our experience here, especially when we first opened in 2009, people would walk in, peek their head through the door. They don't really know what to expect. And this is where it's not just a one-sided thing that someone needs to be experienced and, have the experience in that sense. It's the fact that we need to be inviting of them. Utilizing hospitality, being open, having our doors open to answer questions, to share what we know about our way of life, and in return asking about theirs. I feel like that exchange of experience really takes away the root of racism. At that point, the fear of the other is gone. You educate yourself and you learn a few things about someone that you don't know nothing about. At the same time, you have fun and enjoy yourself doing it. The last thing I would say is maybe just don't be shy to ask questions. I know people hesitate to ask me questions thinking I'm going to react in a negative way. If you are coming in an open-minded way, seeking to learn and understand why I do things the way I do it, no one is going to react in a negative way to you. It'll only bring us closer.
So I'm very happy and I feel grateful to live in Canada, because Canada is a peaceful country. They have freedom of expression, and that does not exist in my country yet. However, I feel that we can do more to have a better Canada.
Our kids are going to school together. Half of the school are newcomers, and those kids are friends with my grandchildren. I say, how many black people, Grandpa, you're being racist, they tell me. They're people. It's our young ones that are teaching us. So again, like I said, there's so much that we can do together in that. And if we sat in a circle and listened to one another, what are we leaving for our children? We don't want them to fight like, what other countries are like. We want them to, we want to call them brothers, sisters,
As we continue to work towards building new relationships and fostering social inclusion across the community in Saskatoon, the Truly Alive Youth and Family Foundation would like to leave you with the words of Arundhati Roy. The trouble is that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you've seen it, keeping quiet, saying nothing, becomes as political an act as speaking out. There is no innocence. Either way, you're accountable.